The day they told me I was replaceable, I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because they had no idea what they had just activated. I co-founded Ardent Analytics 12 years ago. Back then, it was just 3 of us in a rented apartment. 1 laptop, 1 folding table, bad coffee, big dreams. I built the product. I wrote the first code base. I pitched the first investor. I signed the first enterprise client. But when the money started flowing, the titles changed. They became visionary executives. I became Chief Technical Officer. It sounded powerful. It wasn't. Over the years, I noticed something. Equity conversations stopped including me. Board meetings happened without my calendar invite. Decisions were already aligned before I entered the room. Still, I stayed calm because I understood something they forgot. Contracts matter more than conversations, and I read every line of ours. 5 years earlier, during Series B funding, investors demanded structural protections. That's when the lawyers added a clause. Buried deep. Page 47, Section 9.3, Part C. At the time, everyone skimmed it. Except me. Revenue realignment trigger. Simple wording. If a founding executive was removed without material performance breach, and if said executive held original IP authorship rights, then revenue derived from that IP could be reclassified under licensing distribution. Translated, if they pushed me out without cause, they wouldn't own 100% of the product revenue anymore. They would owe licensing fees, up to 60%. At the time, it felt like insurance. I never thought I would use it. Until the Monday morning meeting. The boardroom was quiet. Glass walls, city skyline, expensive chairs. Marcus, our CDO, didn't look at me when he started speaking. We're restructuring leadership for scalability. Corporate language, meaning someone is about to bleed. We believe technical innovation needs new direction. That's when he finally looked at me. The CTO role. Not fired, just removed. They offered a strategic advisor title. No authority, no voting power, no real access. A polite exile. I asked one question. For cause? Marcus shook his head slightly. Just strategic evolution. The board nodded in fake sympathy. They thought they were being generous. I nodded slowly. Understood. They expected anger, argument, emotion. I gave them none, because I already knew what that wording meant. Without cause. That was the key. That evening, I went home and opened the original contract. Page 47, Section 9.3c. Still there. Unmodified, untouched. They had amended compensation structures, board voting rights, stock dilution formulas. But they never removed the revenue realignment trigger. Because they forgot I negotiated the original IP ownership structure, the core algorithm, the predictive engine, the optimization model, all registered under my authorship before company transfer. The company owned operational rights, but permanent IP origination rights, still traceable to me. And the clause connected those dots. I called my attorney the next morning. Not dramatically, calmly. I think it's time to review 9.3c. Silence on the line. Then a low whistle. They removed you without cause. Yes, they shouldn't have done that. Within a week, a formal notice was delivered to Ardent Analytics. Subject line: Invocation of Revenue Realignment Trigger. The board thought it was a negotiation tactic. Marcus called me immediately. "What is this?" "It's a clause," I replied evenly. "You can't just take 60% of revenue. I'm licensing my IP back to the company under contractual terms you agreed to." Silence. "You're bluffing." "I'm not." That's when legal teams got involved. For 2 weeks they tried to poke holes in it. But the wording was clean, precise, intentional. The clause didn't activate if I was fired for misconduct. It didn't activate if I resigned voluntarily. It activated only if I was removed without documented breach, which they proudly confirmed in writing. Strategic evolution. Those 2 words cost them everything, because 82% of Ardent's revenue came directly from the algorithm I created. Without it, their valuation collapsed. With it, under the clause, they owned 60% of derived revenue as licensing distribution. Not profit. Revenue. Gross. The board held an emergency session. Investors panicked. Stock dipped 18% in 2 days. Calling again. This time, he sounded different. Less confident. "We can settle. I'm open to discussion," I said. "What do you want?" Interesting question. Because this was never about money. 3 years earlier, I had proposed expanding into ethical AI auditing tools. Marcus shut it down. Not profitable. 6 months later, a competitor launched it. Raised $200 million. We could have led that market. But Marcus only cared about quarterly optics. Now he needed me. Desperately. Meanwhile, the clause officially activated. Accounting teams recalculated revenue flow structures. Investors demanded clarity. Media caught wind of founder dispute over IP rights. Suddenly, I wasn't replaceable. I was critical infrastructure. But here's the twist. I never intended to actually take 60%. I intended to expose something bigger. My final months inside Ardent, I noticed unusual patterns. Aggressive revenue projections, inflated performance reporting, deferred liability masking. They were preparing for acquisition. A major tech conglomerate was in late-stage talks to buy Ardent for $2.4 billion. But those projections, they depended on uninterrupted algorithm performance margins. Margins that only existed because I personally adjusted optimization thresholds manually each quarter. A quiet correction system. Without it, predictive error rates increased. Client churn would rise. But Marcus didn't know that. He thought the system ran itself. So when I was removed, I also stopped maintaining that silent correction layer. Within weeks, performance deviation began. Small at first, then noticeable. Enterprise clients started asking questions. Then the acquisition due diligence team requested deeper. Technical audits. That's when everything cracked. Because once they reviewed system architecture, they discovered something. The optimization core required manual parameter oversight. Oversight that no one else understood fully. And legally, under the clause, they couldn't force me to provide it without renegotiating IP terms. The acquisition deal paused, then stalled, then collapsed. Stock fell 34%. Investors were furious. Marcus was desperate. He requested a private meeting. No board. No lawyers, just us. We met in the same apartment where we built the first prototype. He looked older. "You're destroying the company. I'm protecting what we built. You triggered a nuclear clause. You removed a founder without cause." He rubbed his temples. What do you want? Finally, the real conversation. I want voting protection restored. Silence. I want ethical AI division funded. More silence. I want governance transparency and removal of performance inflation practices. His eyes narrowed. You're accusing us of fraud? I'm correcting direction. He stared at me for a long time. You planned this? Did I? Not exactly. But I did prepare. There's a difference. 2 days later, the board offered a deal. Cancel the clause activation. Return as Chief Innovation Officer, with expanded authority. 2 new independent board seats. Full audit transparency. Ethical AI division launch. And public statement clarifying my strategic transition. Countered with one condition. Marcus steps down. That room went cold. Investors resisted. But numbers don't lie. Without me, acquisition was dead. Revenue would shrink. Lawsuits from clients could surface if performance drift continued. They chose survival. Marcus resigned quietly. Public statements cited personal reasons. I returned. Not as CTO, as co-CEO. But here's the final twist. 3 months later, during internal audits for restructuring, we uncovered something disturbing. Marcus had accelerated revenue recognition improperly during the last 2 quarters before acquisition talks. Not full fraud, but dangerously close. If the deal had closed under those inflated metrics, post-acquisition lawsuits would have exploded. The company would have collapsed under litigation. The clause? It didn't just give me leverage, it prevented a catastrophic situation. Sale built on unstable projections. When investors realized that, their anger shifted. They stopped seeing me as a threat. They saw me as insurance. The ethical AI division launched within 6 months. It became our fastest growing product line. Ironically, it now generates 40% of company revenue. The same board that once called me replaceable now requests my opinion before every strategic vote. Sometimes I walk past the glass boardroom and remember that Monday morning. The calm voices, the fake sympathy, the word transition. They thought removing me would simplify power. Instead, it activated accountability. I never screamed, never threatened, never sabotaged. I simply read the contract they forgot and waited. Because power isn't loud. It's precise. They thought I was just a technical founder. They didn't realize I was the architect, but of the protection built around it. One clause, one signature, one moment of arrogance on their part cost them control. They tried to push me out quietly. Instead, they handed me 60% of their revenue leverage, and I used it, not to destroy the company, but to rebuild it properly. That's the thing about contracts. They don't care about ego. They don't care about hierarchy. They don't care about boardroom theatrics. They only care about wording. And wording is everything.